A billionaire invited the most bullied girl in school out on a date. When he met her again, she was a single mother, and he was completely enchanted by her transformation. Secrets from the past came to light, and their lives changed forever. A story that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment where you're watching from. The intense aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the characteristic scent of concrete and steel from the skyscrapers of the Upper East Side, creating an atmosphere that perfectly defined Richard Smith's world. At 38, he had built a tech empire that rivaled the biggest companies in Silicon Valley. But on that March morning, his hands trembled slightly as he held an invitation that had arrived via email. 20-year reunion, St. Benedict's Academy, read the gold-embossed header on a navy blue background. Richard adjusted his pure silk tie as his eyes scanned the list of confirmed attendees until they abruptly stopped at one name: Mary Johnson. The name echoed in his mind like a ghost from the past, instantly transporting him to the marble corridors of New York's most elite school. Mr. Smith. The voice of Christina, his executive assistant for over 10 years, cut through his memories. The meeting with the Japanese investors is in 15 minutes. Richard lifted his gaze, finding his reflection in the panoramic window that offered a stunning view of the city. His bespoke suit, tailored to perfection, molded his athletic silhouette, a result of years of personal training and almost military discipline. His dark hair, slightly graying at the temples, was impeccably styled, and his dark brown eyes carried an intensity that intimidated even the most seasoned executives. "Cancel it," he said, surprising even himself. "Excuse me?" Christina raised her eyebrows, clearly confused. In a decade of working together, she had never seen him cancel a last-minute meeting. "You heard me. Reschedule for tomorrow." He rose from the Italian leather armchair that cost more than many economy cars. "And Christina, I need you to look someone up for me." Richard's office occupied the entire upper floor of the building, with glass walls that allowed for a 360-degree view of New York. Contemporary American art adorned the space, including a bronze sculpture by a renowned artist and modern art pieces. Each item had been carefully selected not for personal taste, but by consultants, ensuring maximum visual and social impact. Christina returned 2 hours later with a discreet dossier. Mary Johnson, 36 years old, pediatric nurse at the Children's Hospital. Graduated from New York University, specializing in neonatal intensive care. Single mother of an 8-year-old girl named Sophia. Richard opened the file, studying the few available photographs. The woman before him in the images bore no resemblance to the skinny, awkward teenager he remembered. Mary now possessed a natural and mature beauty, with wavy brown hair framing a delicate yet determined face. Her green eyes expressed a serenity that contrasted sharply with the insecurity he recalled from their school days. "Is that all?" he asked, noting the brevity of the report. "She maintains a very low profile on social media, sir. Just a few pictures with her daughter and colleagues. She seems to be a common person." The word common echoed strangely in Richard's mind. In his world, nothing and no one was common. Everyone in his orbit had some strategic value, some useful connection, some specific interest. When was the last time he had met someone truly common? His memories of school began to emerge with disturbing clarity. Mary was always the last to be chosen for group projects, the one who sat alone in the cafeteria eating a simple lunch brought from home. He and his friends, the children of New York's elite, made cruel jokes about her plain clothes, her faded sneakers, her almost pathological shyness. "Remember Mary, the weird girl," they used to say, mimicking her soft voice and hunched posture. Richard felt a pang of something he couldn't name. Regret? Shame? They were emotions he had long since learned to suppress. The intercom buzzed again. "Mr. Smith, your mother is on line 1. "Transfer it to my cell," replied, knowing that Mrs. Smith only called when something important was happening in high society. "Richard, dear," his aristocratic mother's voice came through the device. "I heard you received the invitation for the St. Benedict's reunion. I hope you're not thinking of attending. It would be completely inappropriate for someone in your position to mingle with. Well, you know how these gatherings are. Pure, cheap nostalgia." "And why would it be inappropriate, Mother?" "Oh dear, you are Richard Smith. Your presence at such events makes headlines, generates unnecessary speculation. Besides, I'm sure people will show up trying to take advantage of your generosity or seek connections for dubious business." Richard hung up without responding, irritated by his mother's presumption, but also recognizing the truth in her words. His presence at any public event generated commotion. Photographers appeared out of nowhere. People who barely knew him in school suddenly remembered deep friendships. And his inbox was bombarded with requests for investments, donations, and business opportunities. But something about Mary was different. Christina's research revealed a person who seemed genuinely uninterested in the spotlight or social connections. She didn't have a LinkedIn profile. Her Instagram account was private with only 200 followers, and there was no mention of her in social or professional media. That night, in his 8,600-square-foot penthouse on the Upper East Side, Richard found himself gazing at the city lights through the enormous glass windows. The minimalist and expensive decor of the apartment, Scandinavian design furniture, contemporary art pieces, a climate-controlled wine cellar with bottles that cost more than a salary. It suddenly seemed cold and lifeless to him. He remembered a specific afternoon in high school during his junior year. Mary was reading alone under a tree in the courtyard when some of her friends began to tease her, pretending to be interested in her book only to mock her choice later, a simple, contemporary romance, unlike the classic French literature that was considered appropriate in their social circle. "Why don't you read Proust, Mary?" said William, one of her crueler classmates. "Oh, of course. It must be too difficult for you." Richard hadn't actively participated in the humiliation, but he hadn't defended her either. He simply watched in silence as she put away her book and walked away with flushed cheeks of embarrassment. Now, 20 years later, he wondered what kind of person she had become. The pediatric nurse, who cared for sick children, was certainly very different from the insecure teenager he remembered, and for the first time in decades, Richard Smith felt genuinely curious about someone who could offer him nothing more than, what? Company? Conversation? Concepts that had become strange in his adult life. The next morning, he sent his RSVP for the reunion. The Rose House, a historic mansion in downtown Brooklyn, was majestically decorated for the reunion night. Jacaranda trees in full bloom painted the garden a vibrant purple, their petals gently falling onto the cobblestone paths that wound between imperial palms and century-old jackfruit trees. The sweet aroma of flowers mingled with the subtle perfume of night-blooming jasmine that began to blossom with the arrival of the Brooklyn twilight. Richard arrived at 8 in the evening, driving his navy blue Porsche 911 Turbo S, but parked 2 blocks before the event. He didn't want his arrival to become the center of attention before he even entered. He wore a charcoal grey Hugo Boss blazer over a white dress shirt without a tie, his attempt to appear more casual, though he still exuded the natural elegance of someone accustomed to luxury. As he crossed the ornate wrought-iron gate, he was immediately recognized by the event organizer, Marcus Taylor, who had been the president of the student council. "Richard, man, I can't believe you came." Marcus approached with an exaggeratedly enthusiastic smile, accompanied by a blonde woman whom Richard vaguely recognized as Patricia, a former cheerleader. "Guys, look who just arrived, the billionaire of the group." The small group that formed around him included familiar faces, but they seemed strangely aged and distant. Conversations about mortgages, small children, and corporate careers dominated the atmosphere, while Richard automatically responded to questions about his businesses, feeling as if he were in yet another interview for an economics magazine. "And you, Richard? Married? Kids?" Patricia asked, her eyes sparkling with a curiosity he recognized as opportunistic. "Single," he replied dryly, his eyes already discreetly searching for Mary in the main hall. The interior of the Rose House had been transformed into an elegant yet cozy setting. Round tables covered with white linen tablecloths were scattered throughout the high-ceilinged hall, illuminated by crystal chandeliers that cast golden light onto the exposed brick walls. A small band played classic American pop music, artists like Elton John, Billy Joel, and Carly Simon, creating a nostalgic soundtrack that transported everyone back to the 90s. It was then that he saw her. Mary was near the makeshift bar, animatedly chatting with two women Richard didn't recognize. She wore a flowing navy blue midi dress that accentuated her feminine silhouette without being flashy, comfortable mid-heel shoes, and a discreet silver chain around her neck. Her chestnut hair fell in natural waves over her shoulders, and her now mature and expressive face radiated a confidence that the teenage Mary had never possessed. Richard watched her for a few minutes, fascinated by the transformation. The hunched posture of youth had given way to a natural elegance. She gestured while speaking, laughing genuinely, her green eyes sparkling with a vitality that made those around her lean in closer, as if they wanted to absorb some of that positive energy. When he finally gathered the courage to approach, Mary was explaining something about her work at the hospital to a small group that had formed around her. And you can't imagine the look of surprise on the little boy's face when I told him the injection had magic powers to make the pain go away, she said, mimicking a child's astonished expression. 5 minutes later, he was asking me if I had more magic potions to take home. The group laughed genuinely, and Richard noticed how her smile lit up her entire face, creating small wrinkles around her eyes that spoke of someone who laughed often. "Mary," he said, interrupting the conversation. She turned, and for a few seconds he saw a look of confusion on her face. She studied him intently, as if trying to fit the pieces of a puzzle together, until recognition finally dawned. "Richard Smith?" Her voice carried surprise, but not the nervousness he expected. "Wow, you've changed a lot." "You too," he replied, extending his hand politely. "How are you?" Mary shook his hand firmly, not the hesitant grip he remembered from their teenage years, but the confident handshake of a professional used to dealing with people. "Well, thank you. And you? I heard you've become some sort of business celebrity." The casual way she mentioned his fame threw him off. There was no excessive admiration, no nervousness, no obvious attempts to impress him. It was as if she were talking to an old acquaintance. "Yeah, business has been good," he replied, feeling strangely uncomfortable with the forced modesty. "And you? Nursing, right? Pediatrics at the Children's Hospital. I mainly work in the neonatal intensive care unit." Her eyes lit up as she spoke about her work. "It's challenging but extremely rewarding. Every baby we manage to save, there's no better feeling in the world." Richard found himself genuinely interested. In the world of corporate conversations, discussions about work invariably led to talks about profits, market shares, and growth strategies. Here was someone speaking about saving lives with a passion he rarely saw in his corporate environment. "It must be emotionally intense," he commented. "It is," she agreed, and for the first time her expression became more serious. "Especially when you have a daughter and can imagine what the parents are going through. But that's exactly why I dedicate myself so much. Every family deserves someone to fight for their babies as if they were our own children." "You have a daughter?" Sophia, 8 years old. She's the light of my life. Mary's face softened completely at the mention of the child. She wanted to come today to meet Mommy's old friends, but I explained that it was an adults-only party. She was disappointed because she wanted to know if I was popular in school. Richard laughed, surprised by the naturalness of the conversation. "And what did you say?" "The truth," Mary shrugged with a smile, "that I was kind of weird and shy, but that it was okay because I became a much better person afterward. She was relieved because she thinks she's kind of weird sometimes too." At that moment, William, the same one who had humiliated Mary years ago, approached the group, clearly altered by alcohol. "Mary, the famous nerd of the group," he said too loudly, attracting glances. "And talking to our magnate. What an interesting coincidence." Richard noticed something tense in Mary's face, but she maintained a polite smile. "William," she greeted coldly. "How are you?" "Oh, you know, trying to survive in the real world. Not like some here who were born lucky." He looked pointedly at Richard. "But I'm impressed to see you two chatting. Remember high school, Richard? How we used to tease her." The silence that followed was awkward. Richard felt everyone around waiting for his reaction, but it was Mary's next words that completely surprised him. "Interesting how people hold different memories of the same situations," she said calmly, looking directly at William. "Honestly, I barely remember the details of high school. I was always focused on studying and getting a scholarship for college. The rest was just background noise." The devastating simplicity of her response left William speechless. Mary hadn't denied the humiliations, but she had reduced them to something so insignificant in her life that they weren't even worth remembering. It was a demonstration of strength and maturity that deeply impressed Richard. "Excuse me," she said politely. "I'm going to get a soda." As she walked away, Richard watched her with growing admiration. The woman he had just met possessed something he had lost long ago: authenticity. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, wasn't playing complex social games, had no hidden agendas. She was simply real. And that terrified him as much as it fascinated him. The Children's Hospital emerged as a fortress of hope in the urban landscape of southern New York. The main building, with its brick-colored walls and large windows, contrasted with the mirrored skyscrapers that dominated the city skyline. It was a typical May morning, with the grey sky heavy with humidity and traffic already congested on the highways, when Richard parked his black Audi A8 in the visitor's spot. 2 weeks had passed since their reunion, and the image of Mary wouldn't leave his mind. It wasn't obsession, he tried to convince himself, but an intellectual curiosity about a person who seemed to operate under completely different principles than his own. During his sleepless nights in his empty penthouse, he found himself imagining what her routine was like, what kind of challenges she faced daily, how she balanced motherhood with such a demanding career. "Dr. Miller is waiting for you in the administration room," the receptionist informed him, a middle-aged lady whose badge identified her as Mrs. Brown. She led him through hallways that smelled of hospital disinfectant, mixed with the sweet aroma of flowers that visitors brought for the patients. Richard observed everything around him with the meticulous attention he applied to all his investments. The walls needed a fresh coat of paint, some equipment seemed outdated, and he noticed that the air conditioning system made an irregular noise, suggesting deferred maintenance. It wasn't a hospital in ruins, but it clearly operated on a limited budget. Dr. Henry Miller, the clinical director for 15 years, was a 60-year-old man with grey hair and tired eyes that lit up when he saw Richard enter his office. "Mr. Smith, it's an honor to have you here," he said, rising from a desk covered with files and reports. I confess that when I received the call from your office, I thought it was some mistake. Not at all, Doctor. I have a genuine interest in learning more about the work you do here, Richard replied, settling into the worn leather chair that creaked under his weight. Dr. Miller began to present the numbers. The hospital served over 3,000 children a month, maintained 40 neonatal intensive care unit beds, performed complex surgeries that saved lives that would be lost in institutions with fewer resources. But the numbers that impacted Richard the most were the financial ones. The hospital constantly operated in the red, relied on donations to maintain basic services, and had a waiting list for essential equipment that couldn't be acquired due to lack of funds. Our neonatal intensive care unit is a reference in New York, the doctor explained with evident pride. We have exceptional professionals like Nurse Mary Johnson. She coordinates our intensive care team and has saved more babies in the last 5 years than I can count. Richard struggled to maintain a neutral expression upon hearing her name. I would like to see the facilities, he said. The tour of the hospital's facilities was a transformative experience for Richard. He had donated millions to philanthropic causes over the years, but always through bank transfers and third-party reports. Never. He had physically stepped into the places benefited by his generosity. The neonatal intensive care unit was on the 3rd floor, a unit with 40 incubators arranged in organized rows, each containing a baby smaller than he had ever imagined could survive. The environment was kept at a controlled temperature, with soft lighting and minimal noise. Electronic monitors emitted constant beeps, each sound representing a life in struggle. It was then that he saw her. Mary was bent over an incubator in the center of the unit, wearing light blue scrubs that accentuated her green eyes. She was speaking softly to a young mother who was silently crying beside the crib. He is responding well to the treatment, Jessica. Mary's voice was gentle, yet confident. Look how the oxygen saturation has improved since yesterday. He's a warrior, just like his mother. Richard watched, hidden behind a column, as Mary delicately adjusted the tubes connected to the tiny baby. Her movements were precise and assured, yet incredibly gentle. She lightly stroked the mother's head and whispered something that made the woman stop crying and manage a weak smile. Nurse Mary is special, Dr. Miller commented, noticing the direction of Richard's gaze. She has a gift. The babies respond better when she is caring for them. The mothers instinctively trust her. We've received offers from private hospitals offering 3 times the salary, but she never wanted to leave here. Why not? She says this is where she needs to be most, that wealthy babies have many people fighting for them, but ours need someone who fights for them as if they were their own children. Richard felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he couldn't name. When was the last time he had seen someone deliberately choose to earn less money to make a bigger difference? At that moment, Mary looked up and saw him watching through the glass that separated the ICU from the hallway. For a few seconds, their eyes met, and he saw genuine surprise in her green eyes. She said something to the baby's mother and headed toward the door. "Richard?" She stepped out of the ICU, still wearing surgical gloves and a mask pulled down to her chin. "What are you doing here?" "Dr. Miller was showing me around the hospital," he replied, feeling strangely uncomfortable, as if he had been caught eavesdropping. Mary looked from the doctor to Richard with an expression he couldn't decipher. "It's unexpected," she said diplomatically. "Are you interested in pediatrics?" "I'm interested in understanding how I can help," Richard answered honestly. Dr. Miller's face lit up. "Mr. Smith is considering making a donation to the hospital." Richard saw a shadow pass over Mary's eyes, but she merely nodded politely. "That's very generous of you," she said. but there was something in her voice that suggested reservation. "Excuse me, I need to get back to my patients." She disappeared back into the ICU, leaving Richard with the uncomfortable feeling that he had somehow disappointed her. 3 days later, Richard returned to the hospital, this time accompanied by his lawyer, Dr. Robert Stevens, an upright man in his 50s who had managed his philanthropic matters for over a decade. $2 million for neonatal ICU equipment, Dr. Stevens announced, handing the check to Dr. Miller. Anonymous donation as requested by Mr. Smith. The clinical director was visibly moved. "This will save hundreds of lives, hundreds. We can buy 3 new state-of-the-art incubators, a neonatal ventilator, cardiac monitors. Mr. Smith, you have no idea the impact this will have." "Actually," Richard said, "I would like to follow up on how the funds are being used. Can I return in a few weeks to see how the money is being utilized?" Of course, it would be an honor. As they walked back to the parking lot, Dr. Stevens observed his client with curiosity. "Richard, in 15 years of working with you, I've never seen you so personally involved with a donation. Usually, you just sign the check and that's it. What's special about this hospital?" Richard stopped next to his car, looking back at the building where Mary was working at that very moment, probably saving lives with the same dedication he had witnessed. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "you need to see where the money really makes a difference." But the truth, which he couldn't admit even to himself, was much simpler and more terrifying. For the first time in his adult life, he wanted to impress someone who apparently could not be impressed. And that scared him deeply. That night, alone in his penthouse, Richard wondered if Mary would find out he was the anonymous donor, and more importantly, what she would think if she found out. The municipal college professor, Oswald Cruz, located on a residential street in Brooklyn, was unrecognizable on this June night. The cement courtyard that usually hosted only children's soccer games had been transformed into a true summer festival. Colorful crepe paper streamers formed a cheerful ceiling among the trees, while makeshift wooden stalls offered hot apple cider, popcorn, corn pudding, and traditional sweets. The smell of roasted corn mingled with the aroma of cinnamon and ginger, wafting from the steaming pots of hot apple cider. Richard parked his car 3 blocks before the school, deliberately choosing a discreet black Civic instead of any of his flashier vehicles. He wore dark jeans, the first he had bought in over a decade, and a plaid shirt that he had sent his assistant to fetch from a regular department store. The end result was someone who clearly was not used to casual clothing, but at least didn't look like they had stepped out of a luxury magazine. Christine had done discreet research and discovered that Sophia studied at this public school in Brooklyn, and that the summer festival was the biggest social event of the year for the families in the community. Richard couldn't rationally explain what motivated him to come. He just knew that the possibility of seeing Mary in her natural environment, away from the hospital protocols, exerted an irresistible attraction. The school gate was decorated with bamboo arches and paper. Flowers and a hand-painted sign announced "Summer Festival, the Oswaldo Cruz family." A line of families waited to enter, parents carrying children dressed in festive attire, grandparents with baskets of homemade treats, and excited teenagers anticipating the square dance and bonfire. As he passed through the entrance, Richard was warmly greeted by a teacher who clearly mistook him for a parent at the school. "Good evening. Is this your first time at our festival?" she asked, offering a corn-shaped stamp for his hand. "I'm Miss Smith from the 3rd grade class." "Yes," Richard replied, allowing her to stamp his hand. "Very exciting. Oh, you're going to love it. We have the best corn pudding in the area, made by Mrs. Johnson, mother of Peter from 4th grade, and Mr. Antonio's hot apple cider is famous throughout the neighborhood." Richard found himself being guided through the festival by Ms. Smith, who insisted on introducing him to everyone. It was a completely alien experience for someone used to events where every conversation had a specific purpose and every interaction followed strict social protocols. "Look, there's popcorn at the second-grade booth," Ms. Smith pointed excitedly, "and over there is the fishing game for the kids, organized by the first-grade parents. Oh, and you can't miss the square dance at 9 o'clock. The kids have been practicing for weeks." It was then that he saw her. Mary was behind the homemade sweets booth, wearing a blue and white floral dress that made her look like an authentic country girl, but in a charming and natural way. Her hair was styled in 2 braids adorned with colorful ribbons, and she wore light makeup that highlighted her freckles. Freckles Richard had never noticed before, but now found absolutely enchanting. She was arranging chocolate truffles, coconut candies, and coconut sweets on trays, chatting animatedly with other mothers working at the same booth. Her laughter echoed above the general noise of the festival, musical and genuine. "Mary! My friend Mary!" Ms. Smith waved enthusiastically. "Come here and meet the—" "Sorry, what was your name again?" "Richard," he replied, feeling his heart race as Mary approached. "Richard, this is our dear Mary, mother of Sophia from 4th grade and a nurse at the Children's Hospital. Mary, Richard is experiencing our little festival for the first time." The moment Mary recognized him was almost comical. Her open smile froze on her face. Her green eyes widened slightly, and she looked from Richard to Miss Smith as if trying to understand if she was dreaming. "Richard Smith," she said slowly. "Hi, Mary," he replied, feeling ridiculously nervous. "Beautiful festival." How did you know?" she began, but was interrupted by an energetic child's voice. Mom, look how much I won at the fishing game." An 8-year-old girl with curly brown hair and green eyes identical to Mary's ran up to them, carrying a plastic bag full of colorful fish and some candies. Sophia was a miniature version of her mother, but with a vibrant energy that made her seem to be always in motion. "Sophia, sweetheart, come here," Mary said, protectively placing her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "This is Richard, a friend of Mommy's." Sophia studied Richard with the disarming curiosity of children. "Are you alone at the festival?" The direct question left Richard momentarily speechless. "I am," he admitted. "How sad. Everyone should have company at the summer festival," Sophia declared, with the wisdom of someone who had experienced 8 summer festivals. "Do you want a fish? I caught a lot." She extended the bag to Richard, who looked at Mary, silently asking for permission before accepting a blue plastic fish. "Thank you, Sophia. It's very pretty." "It's my favorite. Blue is the color of the sea, and I've never seen the sea for real. But one day Mommy said she would take me to see it." Richard saw Mary blush slightly. "Sophia, why don't you go play a little more? I'll finish up here and meet you." "Can I go to the roasted corn booth? Mrs. Brown said she was going to make a special one just for me." "You can, but stay where I can. See you?" Mary kissed her daughter's forehead, and Sophia ran off toward the roasted corn booth. They stood in awkward silence for a few seconds before Mary spoke. "How did you find out where the festival was?" Her voice carried a mix of curiosity and something Richard couldn't identify: suspicion, embarrassment. "Research," he admitted honestly. "I wanted, I don't know, to see you in your natural environment, I guess." Mary studied him intensely. "Richard, that's kind of weird. You show up at the high school reunion after 20 years, then you appear at my workplace, and now you're at my daughter's school festival. What's going on?" The direct confrontation caught him off guard. In his corporate world, no one questioned his motivations so straightforwardly. "Honestly, I can't explain. You intrigue me." "I intrigue you?" Mary laughed, but it wasn't a light-hearted laugh. "Richard, I'm a nurse, a single mother. I live in Brooklyn in a 2-bedroom apartment financed by the bank. There's nothing intriguing about my life." "That's exactly what intrigues me," Richard said, surprising himself with his honesty. "You seem genuine, happy with choices that others would consider sacrifices." Mary watched him for a long moment, as if trying to decipher his intentions. "Do you want some popcorn?" she finally asked, grabbing a bag from the nearby booth. "It's sweet, made with crystal sugar, very different from the gourmet stuff you must be used to." They walked together through the festival, sharing the popcorn. Richard watched in fascination as Mary seemed to know practically everyone at the festival, greeting parents, playing with children, asking about teachers' families. She was clearly a beloved and respected person in that community. "Uncle, uncle!" Sophia came running back, this time heading straight for Richard. "The square dance is about to start and I don't have a partner. Will you be my partner?" Richard looked in panic at Mary, who looked equally surprised. "Sophia, dear, Richard probably doesn't know how to square dance." "I'll teach him," Sophia interrupted enthusiastically. "It's easy, just follow what the caller says." And before anyone could protest, Sophia grabbed Richard's hand and dragged him to the center of the yard, where other children and adults were lining up for the traditional square dance. What followed was simultaneously the most embarrassing and the most fun experience Richard had had in decades. Led by a local caller shouting "Yee-haw" and "swing," he found himself being guided by an 8-year-old girl through the basic steps of the dance, stumbling over his own feet and laughing in a way he hadn't done since childhood. Mary watched from the side, and Richard saw her smiling. Not the polite smile she had offered him earlier, but a genuine smile of enjoyment. When the music ended and Sophia spontaneously hugged him, thanking him for being her partner, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The pure and simple feeling of belonging somewhere, even if just temporarily. "You're cool, Uncle Richard," Sophia said, still hugging him. "Will you come back to the next party?" Richard looked over the girl's head and met Mary's eyes. For a moment her guard seemed to completely lower, and he saw something that made him feel as if he had been struck by lightning. Tenderness. She was looking at him with tenderness. Richard's office, on the 42nd floor of the most modern building in Manhattan, had never seemed so intimidating. The panoramic view of New York stretched to the horizon, where glass and steel skyscrapers reflected the July sun in thousands of golden fragments. Mary was sitting in the leather chair in front of his executive desk, wearing a navy blazer over a simple white blouse, clearly her best corporate attire, yet it still contrasted drastically with the luxury around her. Richard had spent 3 days planning this meeting after a sleepless week, thinking about the summer festival. The image of Mary smiling as she watched him dance, square dance with Sophia, had become a silent obsession. He wanted to find a way to keep her in his life, to create legitimate opportunities for more encounters. "Thank you for having me," Mary said politely, her hands resting on a small leather bag that had seen better days. "I confess I was curious when your assistant called. I didn't imagine we had professional matters to discuss." Christine had been instructed to be vague when extending the invitation, mentioning only an interesting professional opportunity. Richard stood up from his chair and walked to the window, trying to appear casual, but actually searching for courage for his proposal. "Mary, as you know, I manage several philanthropic foundations. One of them is specifically focused on children's health." He turned to face her. "I'm creating a new medical coordination department, and I need someone with your experience and dedication to lead it." Mary tilted her head, genuinely interested. "What would that involve exactly?" "Supervision of children's health programs in public hospitals in New York, development of neonatal intensive care protocols, training teams." Richard had rehearsed this part carefully. "It would be a job that would allow you to impact many more lives than you can currently, limited to a single hospital." "Interesting," Mary nodded slowly. "And what would the compensation be?" Richard had calculated this number obsessively. $18,000 a month, plus full benefits, premium health plan for you and Sophia, meal vouchers, company car. He saw Mary's eyes widen slightly. It was more than 3 times her current salary at the hospital. 18,000, she repeated slowly. That's very generous. It's what the position deserves, Richard said quickly. Someone with your profile could have been earning that for years in the private sector. Mary remained silent for almost a minute, looking out the window at the city below. Richard watched every micro-expression on her face, trying to decipher her thoughts. "Richard," she finally said, turning to face him directly, "can I ask a few questions?" "Of course." "This foundation you mentioned, when was it created?" The question caught him off guard. "A few years ago." "How many years, specifically?" "Why does that matter?" Mary crossed her legs and leaned slightly forward, adopting a posture he recognized from the hospital, the same one she used when explaining diagnoses to worried parents. It was firm but gentle, because I have the impression that this foundation, this department, and this position were created specifically for me in the last 2 weeks. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard felt his face heat up and realized he had been completely unmasked by her keen intelligence. "I can explain," he began. "Please, explain," Mary said, but there was no anger in her voice, only a firmness that demanded total honesty. Richard returned to his chair, suddenly feeling like a teenager caught in a lie by his parents. "You're right. The foundation has been around for 3 years, but this department, I created it with you in mind. I wanted to find a way to—" he searched for the right words. "To have you working with me." "Why?" "Because since the reunion, since I saw you at the hospital, since the summer festival, I can't stop thinking about you." The brutal honesty of his confession seemed to surprise them both. Mary leaned back in her chair, studying him with an expression he couldn't decipher. "Richard," she said softly, "you're trying to buy me." "No!" he protested immediately. "I'm offering a legitimate professional opportunity, with a salary 3 times higher than the market value for my experience, in a position created specifically for me by someone who admits to being personally interested in me." Mary shook her head. "How did you expect me to interpret this?" Richard stood up abruptly, starting to pace back and forth, a habit he had developed when frustrated in complex negotiations. "Maybe I expressed myself poorly. I'm not trying to buy you. I'm trying, I don't know, to create circumstances for, let's spend more time together." "Manipulating circumstances," Mary gently corrected. "Yes," he admitted, stopping in his tracks. "It's manipulating circumstances." Mary took a deep breath, looking out the window again before responding. "Richard, I'm going to be very direct with you because I think you deserve honesty. You're an attractive man, clearly intelligent, and after our conversation at the summer festival, I can see there's a genuine person beneath all this." She gestured vaguely to the luxurious office. "This corporate armor." His heart raced at her initial words, but he sensed a but coming. "But," she continued, confirming his suspicions, "I cannot and will not accept favors, gifts, or opportunities that I haven't earned on my own merit, especially not from someone who is romantically interested in me." "Why not?" "Because it would destroy any chance of us building something real." Mary stood up, grabbing her bag. "If I accepted this job, I would always wonder if you like me or the version of me that you can create with your money. And you would always wonder if I'm with you or your wealth." Richard had never considered this perspective. In his world, money was simply a tool to solve problems and create opportunities. The idea that it could be an obstacle to genuine connections was completely new to him. "So, what are you saying?" Mary walked to the door, but paused before opening it. I'm saying that if you want to get to know me better, and part of me hopes you do, you need to be Richard, the person, not Richard Smith, the billionaire who can create jobs and solve financial problems. She turned to look at him one last time. It needs to be on equal footing, or as close to that as we can get. And how do I do that? A small smile touched her lips, the first genuine smile since she had arrived at the office. Start by inviting me for coffee, a regular coffee, at a normal cafe where we both pay our own bills and talk about normal things. No hidden agendas, no job offers, no attempts to impress. Would you accept such an invitation? Maybe, she said, opening the door. But Richard, you need to understand one thing. I have earned everything I have on my own. My job, my apartment, the support of my daughter. It may not be much compared to your standards, but it's mine, and I won't give up my independence for anything or anyone. After she left, Richard found himself alone in his office, staring at the empty chair where she had been. For the first time in his adult life, his money had proven completely useless in obtaining something he truly wanted. And strangely, it made him respect her even more. That night, he sent a simple message to the number Christine had managed to get. Coffee tomorrow at 3 p.m.? There's a bakery on Augusta Street that makes amazing sugar bread. I promise we'll each pay our own. The reply came 2 hours later. I accept, but you need to find the address on your own. No assistance. For the first time in months, Richard Smith laughed alone in his empty penthouse. The August rain fell with typical intensity of New York's winter, turning the streets into gleaming mirrors that reflected the headlights of cars in the evening traffic. Richard was in his apartment when the phone rang at 6:47 p.m., a time that would normally be occupied by his obsessive gym routines and solitary dinners. The name Mary lit up the screen, and he answered on the first ring. Richard? Her voice was tense, almost unrecognizable. Sorry to call like this, but could you give me a ride? I'm at the hospital with Sophia and my car won't start. It's pouring and the Uber is impossible. Of course. Where are you? What happened? He was already grabbing his keys and coat. St. Luke's Hospital downtown. Sophia had an allergic reaction and... Her voice faltered for a moment. She's stable now, but I need to take her home and she's very sleepy from the medication. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Richard drove his Audi through the flooded streets with an urgency he hadn't felt in, well, never actually. During the ride, he tried calling Mary again, but she didn't answer. In the 2 weeks since she had rejected the job offer, they had met 3 times for coffee, meetings that turned out to be surprisingly natural and comforting, far from the intimidating corporate environment. St. Luke's Hospital buzzed with the typical activity of an emergency room on a rainy afternoon in New York. Ambulances arrived constantly, families waited nervously at the reception, and the smell of disinfectant mingled with the strong aroma of coffee from the 24-hour cafe. Richard found Mary in the pediatric observation room, sitting next to a stretcher where Sophia was sleeping soundly. The little girl was pale, with an IV in her small arm and monitoring stickers stuck to her chest. Mary held her daughter's free hand gently, but her red eyes betrayed hours of contained crying. "Mary," he whispered, lightly touching her shoulder. She looked up, and he saw in her eyes a fatigue that went far beyond a sleepless night. "Thank you for coming," she whispered back. She ate peanuts at school. I always warn about her allergy, but today there was a substitute teacher and... Is she okay now? She is. Responded well to the epinephrine and the steroids. But it was... Mary shuddered slightly. It was scary, Richard. She started to feel unwell during class, swelling in her face, difficulty breathing. For a few minutes, I thought that... Richard pulled a chair beside her, noticing details that told the story of the last few hours. Mary's shirt was wrinkled, as if She had slept in it. There was a coffee stain on her pants, probably spilled with trembling hands, and she was wearing only one earring, the other likely lost in the chaos. "Can I get you anything? Coffee, food?" "No, thank you. I just want to take her home." "Home?" Mary stroked Sophia's hair. "The doctor said she might be discharged soon, but she will need complete rest tomorrow. And you? Will you be able to take off work?" Mary hesitated. "I'll figure it out. I always do." Something in the way she said that alerted Richard. "Mary, tell me the truth. What's going on?" She fell silent for a long moment, watching Sophia's steady breathing. "I've been trying to get a private allergist appointment for her for 6 months, she finally admitted. The public health system has an 8-month waiting list for specialists. In the meantime, she's had 3 episodes, each one stronger than the last. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Mary looked at him with an expression that mixed exhaustion and determination. "Because I don't want you to solve my problems with money. Remember, I'll manage on my own. Even if it puts Sophia at risk." The question hit hard. Mary closed her eyes for a moment, clearly struggling with her own limitations. 3 years ago," she said very softly, "Sophia's father showed up out of nowhere wanting to meet her. He brought expensive gifts, promised trips, talked about private schools and premium health plans." Richard listened in silence, realizing he was about to understand something fundamental about Mary. Sophia was enchanted. For 2 months, he was her hero. He took her shopping, bought her brand-name clothes, promised a golden future. Mary's voice hardened, until his girlfriend got pregnant. Then he disappeared again, without explanation, without goodbye. Sophia was devastated, asking me for months what she had done wrong. "Mary, since then," she continued, "I promised myself I would never let anyone into our lives offering financial solutions to our problems. Because when that someone decides to leave, the problems come back, but Sophia's disappointment remains." Richard felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. He finally understood her resistance, and it made their situation infinitely more complicated. "I'm not him," he said firmly. "I know you're not," Mary replied, looking directly into his eyes. "But Sophia doesn't know the difference. To her, you would just be another wealthy adult showing up offering nice things. And if in the future you decide that this is too complicated, or that you don't want this responsibility anymore." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. At that moment, Sophia began to stir, slowly opening her eyes. "Mom?" Her voice was hoarse from the medication. "I'm here, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Better. Where's Uncle Richard?" Both adults looked at each other in surprise. Sophia was still groggy, but she had recognized his voice. "I'm here, Sophia," Richard said softly, moving closer to the bed. "Did you come to pick me up?" "I came to help your mom take you home." Sophia smiled faintly. "Cool. Can I sleep in your car? It must be really comfy." Richard laughed, feeling his heart tighten at the innocence of the question. "You can sleep as much as you want." An hour later, they were at Mary's apartment in Brooklyn. The low-income building contrasted sharply with anywhere Richard had been recently, but when Mary opened the apartment door, he was surprised by the immediate sense of coziness. The small living room was decorated with simple but well-kept furniture, many plants in the windows, and photographs of Sophia at all stages of her life covering an entire wall. The smell of cinnamon lingered in the air, probably from some dessert Mary had made over the weekend. "Sorry for the mess," she said, helping Sophia settle onto the sofa. "I wasn't expecting visitors." "It's perfect," Richard said, realizing he was speaking sincerely. As Mary prepared tea for Sophia and organized the medications she would need to take, Richard observed the details of the apartment. Books piled in every corner, novels, nursing manuals, children's stories, a small tube television on an improvised shelf, a refrigerator covered with Sophia's drawings and reminders of medical appointments. It was a real home, something his $5 million penthouse definitely was not. "Richard," Mary called from the open kitchen, "would you like some tea too, or coffee?" "Tea is fine." When she returned to the living room carrying a tray with mismatched cups, clearly a set put together over the years, not bought together, Richard made a decision. "Mary, I need to tell you something." She paused, perhaps recognizing the serious tone in his voice. "The anonymous donation to the hospital, $2 million. It was me." The silence that followed was long and tense. Mary carefully placed the tray on the coffee table, then sat in the armchair across from the sofa where Sophia was dozing. "When?" she asked simply. 3 days after the summer festival." "Why?" "Because after seeing you working, I wanted to help, and because—" He hesitated, then decided on total honesty. "Because I wanted to impress you." Mary nodded slowly, as if pieces of a puzzle were fitting together in her mind. "The new equipment in the neonatal intensive care unit, the incubators that saved 3 babies last week." She looked directly at him. "That was your money." "It was. And you're telling me this now because I don't want any more lies between us, not even by omission." Mary remained silent for a long time, watching Sophia sleep. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. "Thank you for telling me. And thank you for the equipment. You really saved lives. But—" a small smile touched her lips. "But nothing. This time there's no but. You donated money to an important cause without trying to gain anything in return, and you told me when you didn't have to. That's different." Richard felt a wave of relief he didn't know he was waiting for. "Can I stay a little longer?" he asked impulsively. "Just until I'm sure Sophia is okay." Mary looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "You can, but you're going to have to watch Frozen 2 with me while she sleeps. It's her favorite movie when she's sick." "I've never seen Frozen 2. "Seriously?" Mary looked genuinely shocked. "Welcome to the real world, Richard Smith." And for the first time in decades, Richard spent a night watching cartoons, sipping tea from mismatched cups, and feeling more at home than he ever had in his luxury penthouse. Spring had arrived early in New York that September, bringing with it the blooming of yellow tulips that painted the avenues with their vibrant flowers. It was a Saturday morning when Richard received the call that would completely change the dynamic of his relationship with Mary, which had evolved into weekly dates and late-night phone conversations that stretched into the early hours. "Richard, dear, we need to talk urgently." His mother's voice sounded more tense than usual over the phone. "Come have lunch with us today. Your grandmother Helen is here." The mention of his paternal grandmother made Richard sigh internally. Mrs. Helen Smith, at 78 years old, was the true matriarch of the family, a woman who had built a real estate empire alongside her late husband and still controlled much of the family inheritance with an iron fist. Her presence always meant that important decisions were being made. The Smith mansion on the Upper East Side was an imposing neoclassical structure, surrounded by meticulously planned gardens by renowned landscapers. When Richard arrived at the electronic gate at 12:30 p.m., he was greeted by Joachim, the butler who had worked for the family for over 20 years. "Good morning, Mr. Richard. Your family is waiting for you in the sunroom." The sunroom was his grandmother's favorite space, a large area with a glass ceiling where rare orchids and bromeliads created a controlled tropical environment. Mrs. Helen was elegantly dressed in a navy blue Chanel suit, her silver hair impeccably styled, wearing diamond jewelry that she rarely took off her aristocratic neck. "Richard, my dear grandson." She stood to kiss him on the cheek, but her smile didn't reach the blue eyes that had intimidated 3 generations of the New York elite. "You look different." It was true. The last few weeks with Mary had changed some of his habits. He was more relaxed, smiled more often, and had even started wearing less formal clothes on weekends. "Good morning, Grandma, Mom." He kissed Mrs. Smith, noticing that she seemed nervous. "Dad didn't come." "Your father is at the club," his mother replied quickly. I preferred to keep this conversation between the 3 of us. Mrs. Helen gestured for him to sit in the wicker chair opposite her, creating a scenario reminiscent of an elegant interrogation. "Richard, I've been receiving concerning information about your recent activities," she began bluntly. "Apparently, you've been frequenting unsuitable places for someone in your position." "What kind of places, Grandma?" "Summer festivals at public schools, public hospitals, ordinary cafes on Augusta Street." Each word sounded like an accusation. "And more concerning, you've been associating with someone of a social class incompatible with our family." Richard felt his blood boil. "Who is watching me?" "It's not surveillance, dear," his mother intervened nervously. "It's protection. People in your position are constant targets for opportunists." "And we believe," Mrs. Helen continued, "that this nurse may be taking advantage of your natural generosity." "Her name is Mary," Richard said firmly, "and she isn't taking advantage of anything, quite the opposite." "Ah, yes, Mary Johnson." Mrs. Helen consulted a folder that was beside her. "Daughter of a retired metallurgist from the industrial area, single mother, family income of less than $5,000. Do you really believe that someone in those circumstances has no interest in your fortune?" "How did you get this information?" "Richard, please," his mother leaned forward. "We are a responsible family. When someone close to you starts appearing in your life frequently, it's natural for us to do a background check." "A background check," he repeated slowly, feeling the anger rise in his chest. "You investigated Mary." "And we found interesting things." Mrs. Helen opened the folder. "This woman has significant medical debts related to her child's treatment. She financed an apartment through a local bank that consumes 40% of her income. She recently sought a loan to pay for a private specialist for the child." Each piece of information felt like a punch to Richard's stomach. He knew Mary was facing financial difficulties, but he had no idea of the extent of the problems. "Do you see the pattern, dear?" his mother said gently. "A woman in financial trouble who suddenly became interested in you after discovering who you are." "It wasn't like that," Richard protested. "She rejected me when I offered help. She turned down a job that would pay 3 times more than her current one." "Smart strategy," Mrs. Helen commented approvingly. "Rejecting the first offers to appear disinterested, gaining your trust, then showing up with emergencies that justify your help. You are being completely unfair." "Richard," Mrs. Helen stood up, assuming the authoritative posture she had used to command board meetings for decades. "You will inherit over $2 billion when I die. This responsibility comes with obligations to our family and our social position. And what if I don't want that responsibility?" The silence that followed was icy. Mrs. Smith paled, and Mrs. Helen narrowed her eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe I want to live my life, make my own choices, without having to approve every personal decision with a family council. And throw away 4 generations of work and sacrifice because of an affair with an opportunist." "Mary is not an opportunist," Richard exploded, standing up from the chair. "She is the Most genuine person I've ever met. She works 12 hours a day, saving children's lives, raises a daughter alone, and refuses any help that she hasn't earned on her own merit." "Richard, lower your voice," his mother whispered, nervously glancing at the staff who might be listening. "I will not lower my voice. I'm tired of living up to your expectations, of dating only approved women from our social circle, of going to only appropriate places." Mrs. Helen Smith approached him, her voice low but heavy with threat. "If you continue with that woman," she said slowly, "you will be completely disinherited. You won't receive a dime from the family inheritance, nothing." "What if she's pregnant?" The question slipped from his lips before he could control himself. An impulsive lie meant to shock, but it had an even more dramatic effect than he expected. Mrs. Smith gasped and collapsed into the nearest chair. Mrs. Helen turned completely pale, leaning on the table to avoid staggering. Is she pregnant?" his grandmother whispered. "No," Richard admitted immediately, regretting the lie. "She's not. But what if she were? Would you cut ties with your own grandchild or great-grandchild because of class? Prejudice?" "Richard Alfonso Smith," Mrs. Helen used his full name, something she only did in moments of extreme gravity. "You have 48 hours to end this relationship and prove that you still have sense. Otherwise, you will be formally disinherited, and I will make sure that all high society knows exactly why." "And what if I choose Mary?" "Then you will choose a life of mediocrity alongside a woman who will eventually leave you when she realizes you can no longer provide the standard of living she expected." Richard looked at his mother, seeking support, but found only silent tears and disappointment. "I can't believe you are capable of this," he finally said. "We are capable of anything to protect our family," Mrs. Helen replied coldly. 48 hours, Richard. Choose wisely." He left the family mansion, driving aimlessly through the streets of New York, his mind spinning between anger, confusion, and a growing certainty that his life had reached a point of no return. That night, for the first time since he had reconnected with her, Richard called Mary and lied. "Sorry, I can't see you this weekend. Some work issues came up." "That's okay," she replied, but he detected a note of concern in her voice. "Are you all right? You sound strange." "I'm fine, just need to sort some things out." After hanging up, Richard sat on his balcony, looking at the city lights and wondering if his grandmother was right. If Mary would really leave him when she found out he could lose his entire fortune because of her. It was a test he didn't have the courage to take. October brought with it an atypical warmth for New York spring, and with it a series of events that would completely shake Mary's and Sophia's lives. Richard had spent 2 agonizing weeks trying to find a way around his family's ultimatum when Christine walked into his office with an expression he had never seen before, a mix of worry and embarrassment. "Mr. Smith, I need to talk to you about something delicate," she said, closing the door behind her. "I received a call from Valerie Johnson." Valerie. The name of his ex-girlfriend echoed in Richard's mind like a bad omen. They had broken up 8 months ago, a 3-year relationship that had been more of a convenient social partnership than true love. Valerie was everything his family approved of, daughter of bankers, graduated in business from an Ivy League university with connections in high society. What did she want? She found out about your relationship with Mary, Christine hesitated, and hired a private investigator to look into it. Richard felt his blood run cold. She did what? Apparently, Mrs. Helen approached Valerie after your conversation, suggested that she try to win you back, and Valerie decided that the best strategy would be to prove that Mary is not who she appears to be. What kind of investigation? Christine placed a folder on the table with evident reluctance, complete financial investigation, Medical history of the daughter, interviews with neighbors, co-workers, school teachers. They even went to the industrial area to talk to her father. Richard opened the folder and felt nauseous at the level of detail. There were photographs of Mary leaving work, of Sophia playing in the schoolyard, copies of medical records that had obviously been obtained illegally, bank statements, credit card purchase history. How did they get this medical information? The investigator has contacts in various institutions. They probably bribed employees. The invasion of privacy was so complete and systematic that Richard felt physically sick. There were intimate details of Mary's and Sophia's lives that he himself didn't know, and shouldn't know unless she chose to share. "There's more," Christine continued reluctantly. "Valerie intends to leak this information to the press. She has contacts in the social column of the state of New York and in the magazine Time. The story would be something like, 'Tech billionaire involved with indebted nurse.'" "When?" "Next week. She called me because she wanted your last chance to reconsider the relationship before making everything public." Richard slammed the folder shut, feeling a mix of anger and despair he had never experienced. "Christine, I want you to hire the best lawyers you can find. I want this investigation stopped immediately, all materials destroyed, and criminal charges against everyone involved. I've already arranged that. Dr. Silvera is handling the legal aspects. But, sir," she hesitated, "Mary already knows." "What do you mean?" The investigator was very obvious. Neighbors commented about strangers asking questions. Co-workers were approached. The doorman of her building was questioned. She called an hour ago asking if I knew why people were investigating her life. Richard abruptly stood up, walking to the window. Down. Below, New York buzzed with its eternal hustle, oblivious to the personal drama unfolding on the 42nd floor. "What did you tell her?" "That I would investigate and return the call. But, sir, she was very scared, mainly worried about Sophia." At that moment, Richard's phone rang. It was Mary. "Richard, we need to talk. Urgent." Her voice was controlled, but he sensed an underlying tension that alarmed him. "Where are you?" "At Sophia's school. Something just happened here. Can you come?" "I'm on my way." The municipal school of Professor Oswald Cruz was in turmoil when Richard arrived. Teachers were talking in small groups. Some parents had been called, and there was a police car parked in front of the school. He found Mary in the principal's office, sitting next to Sophia, who was visibly shaken. The girl, usually talkative and smiling, was silent and clinging to her mother's arm. "Mary, what happened?" "A man showed up here at 2 p.m., explained the principal, a clearly disturbed middle-aged woman. "He said he was doing a security check on Sophia. He wanted to know about her behavior, grades, friendships, if her mother had changed her routine recently." "Did he show any identification?" "He said he was from the Department of Education, but when we asked for official documents, he became evasive. Sophia's teacher felt uncomfortable and called the principal." Mary looked at Richard with an expression that mixed fear and anger. When the principal insisted on seeing official documents, he left quickly, but not before trying to take pictures of the playground and classroom. "Did Sophia see?" "She was at recess when he arrived. Some classmates commented on the strange man who was asking questions about her." Mary's voice trembled slightly. "Richard, my daughter asked me if she did something wrong, if she was in danger." Richard knelt in front of Sophia, who looked at him with wide green eyes filled with fear. "Sophia, you didn't do anything wrong, okay? None of this is your fault." "But why was the man asking about me?" Richard looked at Mary, who nodded almost imperceptibly, a silent permission for him to explain as much as possible. "Sometimes adults do wrong things when they're jealous or angry. But it has nothing to do with you. You're a wonderful girl, and your mother and I will make sure no one bothers you again. Will you protect us?" The simple, direct question hit Richard like a bolt of lightning. It was the first time someone depended on him for real protection. Not financial, not professional, but physical and emotional. "I will," he promised, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. Later, at Mary's apartment, after Sophia had fallen asleep emotionally exhausted, they finally had the conversation they both knew was inevitable. "It's your ex-girlfriend, isn't it?" Mary said, pouring coffee into cups that Richard had come to love for being different and genuine. "How do you know?" A neighbor said that the woman who asked questions about me was very elegant blonde, driving a white BMW. It's not hard to deduce. Mary sat on the sofa next to him. "Richard, why is she doing this?" He told her everything, the ultimatum from his grandmother, the family pressure, Valerie's involvement, the media exposure plans. As he spoke, he saw Mary's expression change from concern to understanding, then to deep sadness. "So your family sees me as a threat," she said when he finished. "They don't know you. If they did—" "Richard," Mary gently interrupted him, "they know me very well now. They know I'm a nurse, that I earn little, that I have doubts, that I raised a daughter alone, and based on these facts, they've decided I'm a gold digger." "You're not." "I know I'm not, and you know I'm not. But to the rest of the world," she gestured vaguely toward the window, "especially to people who live in a universe where relationships always have financial motivations, I am exactly what I seem, a poor woman interested in a rich man. And what do you want to do?" Mary was silent for a long time, looking down the hallway where Sophia was sleeping. "I want to protect my daughter," she finally said. "Sophia didn't ask to be in the middle of this. She doesn't deserve to have her privacy invaded, to be photographed by strangers, or to appear in newspapers as the daughter of the gold digger who seduced the billionaire." "Mary, I think I need to distance myself from you," she said softly but firmly. "At least until this situation is resolved." "No," Richard replied immediately. "I'm not going to let them win like this." "It's not about winning or losing," Mary looked him directly in the eye. "It's about Sophia having a normal childhood. It's about her being able to go to school without being afraid of strange men asking questions. It's about our private life remaining private." Richard felt as if the ground was disappearing beneath his feet. After weeks of discovering what it felt like to be truly alive and connected to another person, the prospect of losing Mary terrified him. "Give me a week," he said impulsively, "a week to sort this out." "How?" "I don't know yet. But I can't accept that our story ends because cruel people decided to destroy your life to get to me." Mary studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "A week," she agreed. "But Richard, if by the end of that week there isn't a solution that protects Sophia, I will disappear from your life completely. It's a promise I make as a mother." That night, driving back to his empty penthouse, Richard made a decision that would change his life forever. The decision Richard had made the night before crystallized in his mind during the early hours of a November morning, as New York woke under a sky heavy with dark clouds, promising the torrential rains typical of the season. He hadn't slept, spending the night on his balcony, watching the city lights and rethinking every moment of the past months alongside Mary and Sophia. At 7 a.m., he called Dr. Robert Silvera, his trusted lawyer for over 15 years. "Robert, I need you here in an hour. I'm going to renounce my family inheritance." The silence of the other side of the line was long and heavy. "Richard, are you sure about what you're saying? We're talking about over $2 billion. "I'm sure. I want all the documents prepared by the end of the day." The morning was a whirlwind of meetings and decisions that would fundamentally alter his life. Richard called an emergency meeting with the board of his companies, announcing his decision to remain only as a minority shareholder in the companies he had personally founded, relinquishing any involvement in the family business. "This means," he explained to the stunned executives, "that my personal wealth will drop from approximately 2.8 billion to around 200 million. It's still more money than most people can spend in a lifetime, but it will be completely independent of the family fortune." Christine, who had witnessed the entire presentation, sought him out in his office when the meeting ended. "Sir, may I ask if this decision has anything to do with Mary?" "It has everything to do with Mary, and with Sophia, and with myself," Richard replied, signing the first documents that Dr. Miller had prepared. "Christine, have you ever stopped to think about what it's like to live always wondering if people like you or your money? I imagine it's complicated. It's paralyzing. In the past few months, alongside Mary, I've discovered what it's like to be appreciated simply for who I am. I can't lose that." At 2 p.m., Richard drove to the family mansion in the Upper East Side. This time, he didn't wait to be announced. He walked straight past the doorman and entered the house where he had grown up, finding his grandmother and mother in the main office, clearly discussing strategies to deal with the Mary situation. "Grandma, Mom," he said, placing a folder on the mahogany table where family decisions had been made for 4 generations. "I'm here to officially announce my decision." Mrs. Helen looked up from the documents she was reading, her expression immediately hardening as she recognized Richard's formal tone. "I hope you've come to your senses," she said coldly. "I'm here to formally renounce the family inheritance." The silence that followed was absolute. Mrs. Smith visibly paled, leaning against the nearest chair. Mrs. Helen remained motionless for several seconds, as if she hadn't understood the words. "What did you say?" "I'm renouncing the inheritance, the shares in the family businesses, the trust fund, the properties, everything." Richard opened the folder and distributed copies of the documents. "It's already been registered. It's irreversible." "Richard, you can't be serious," his mother whispered, her hands trembling as she flipped through the papers. "I'm completely serious. From today on, I am financially independent from the Smith family. I can date whoever I want, marry whoever I want, live however I want." Mrs. Helen slowly stood up, her normally composed face showing a fury that Richard had never witnessed. "Are you willing to throw away 4 generations of work because of a fling with a gold digger? I'm willing to build my own life with the woman I love." The admission came naturally, and Richard realized it was the first time he had verbalized his feelings, even to himself. "The woman you love?" Mrs. Helen laughed, but it was a cruel and disbelieving sound. "You've known this woman for a few months. This is obsession, not love." "Maybe, but it's my obsession, my choice, my life." "And what will you do when she leaves you? When she realizes you're not the billionaire she thought you were? What will you do when you come back here begging for forgiveness?" Richard looked at his grandmother, the woman who had been a central figure in his life for 38 years, and felt a deep sadness, but also a freedom he hadn't experienced since childhood. "If Mary leaves me, it will be because our relationship wasn't strong enough to survive, but at least I'll know it was real while it lasted." "You're being a fool," Mrs. Smith finally found her voice. "Richard, this woman may be manipulating you in ways you don't even realize." "Mom, Mary doesn't even know I'm doing this. In fact, I'm almost certain she'll be furious when she finds out." And he was right. When he arrived at Mary's apartment at 6 p.m., after one of the strangest days of his life, he found her preparing dinner while Sophia did her homework at the table. The simple domestic scene hit him as it always did, with a sense of peace that none of his material possessions had ever provided. "Hi," Mary smiled when she saw him, but Richard detected the tension in her eyes. "How was your day? Did you come up with any solutions?" "I did, but you're not gonna like it." Sophia looked up from her books. "Hi, Uncle Richard. Guess what? I got a 9 on my math test." "Congratulations, Sophia. You're very smart. Mom said that if I keep doing well in school, at the end of the year, she'll take me to Hopi. Harry, do you want to come with us?" Richard looked at Mary, who clearly hadn't expected her daughter to make the invitation. "Sophia, sweetheart, Uncle Richard is a very busy person," she began. "I would love to go with you," Richard interrupted, "if you still want my company in December." After Sophia went to her room to finish her homework, Mary served coffee and sat next to him on the couch. "So, what was the solution you found?" "I renounced the family inheritance." Mary froze completely for several seconds, her face going through a series of expressions: confusion, understanding, and, finally, horror. "You did what?" "I gave up all the family fortune. Now I only have what I've built on my own. It's still a lot of money, but—" "Richard." Mary placed the cup on the table with such force that the liquid splashed. "Have you completely lost your mind?" "Mary, no! Don't come to me with excuses." She stood up, beginning to pace back and forth in the small room. "You threw away billions of dollars because of me. It wasn't because of you. It was for me. Don't lie to me. You did this so that your family needs to stop chasing me." "I did that." Richard stood up as well, taking her hands to force her to stop walking, "because I realized that all this fortune was preventing me from truly living. With you, I discovered what it means to be loved for who I am, not for what I have. And what if it goes wrong between us? What if it doesn't work? Then at least we tried without any doubt about our motivations." Mary stared at him for a long moment, tears shining in her green eyes. "You are completely crazy," she whispered. "Completely." He agreed. "And what if I say that this doesn't change anything, that I still think it's too risky for Sophia to get involved with someone in your position?" "Then I will respect your decision. But Mary—" He gently touched her face. "I love you. I love your intelligence, your strength, your dedication to Sophia, the way you make chocolate truffles because it's the only thing you know how to make, how you sing in the shower thinking no one hears. Did you hear me singing? At the summer festival when you went to change, you were singing off-key to a classic pop song, and it was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my life." For the first time since he arrived, Mary smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I don't sing that off-key. You do, and I love that too." When they kissed for the first time, there in the small living room of the apartment in Brooklyn, with the smell of coffee in the air and the sounds of the city coming through the window, Richard knew he had made the best decision of his life, even if it cost him everything he thought was important. June had come again to New York, bringing with it the first anniversary of the moment that changed everything, the summer festival where Richard had danced a square dance for the first time in his life, guided by Sophia's little confident hand. Now, 12 months later, he found himself in the same playground of the New York Academy, but this time not as a curious visitor, but as part of the community. The colorful banners fluttered gently in the winter evening breeze, creating the same cheerful canopy that had enchanted Richard a year earlier. The familiar smell of hot apple cider, corn pudding, and roasted corn filled the air, mingling with the sound of an accordion and the laughter of families gathering for the traditional celebration. "Uncle Richard!" Sophia ran to him, wearing a pink floral dress with ruffles, her hair styled in braids adorned with yellow ribbons. At 9 years old, she had visibly grown, but she still had the vibrant energy and disarming curiosity that had won him over from their first meeting. "Did you see? I helped organize the fishing game this year." "Really? What an important responsibility. Richard smiled, kneeling to be at her height. And how's the fishing today? Are there many little fish being caught? Many. And there's a special surprise for the parents who managed to catch the little golden fish. What kind of surprise? Sophia made a mysterious face. It's a secret. But Mommy told me that you can participate because now you are, what do you call it, blended family. The expression made Richard laugh genuinely. In the last 8 months since he and Mary had made their relationship official, Sophia had created her own definitions to describe the new family dynamic. Blended family was her term for Richard, someone who wasn't a biological father, but was firmly integrated into their family unit. "Where's your mum?" he asked, looking around the festival. "Over there at the candy booth. She made 3 types of chocolate truffles this year, including the burnt ones that you love." Richard walked through the festival, greeting people he now knew by name, parents of Sophia's classmates, teachers who had become friends, neighbors from the building in Brooklyn where he had spent most of the last few months. It was a completely different social experience from anything he had encountered in his previous life. He found Mary behind the candy booth, wearing the same style of country dress as the previous year, but this time in light blue fabric that highlighted her eyes. She was arranging trays of chocolate truffles while chatting animatedly with other mothers, her hands moving expressively as she told some story that made the group laugh. And then I told Sophia, "Sweetheart, Uncle Richard may know a lot about computers and business, but he knows nothing about plants," she was saying when Richard approached from behind. Then she replied, "Mom, but he's trying. His basil plant has only died 3 times. The group burst into laughter, and Richard announced himself with a joke. "For your information, the current basil plant has been alive for 2 whole weeks. It's a personal record." Mary turned, her face lighting up with a smile that still made his heart race. "Hi, love." She leaned in to kiss him quickly, a natural gesture that spoke of months of growing intimacy. "How was the meeting with the hospital staff?" "Productive. The expansion of the neonatal intensive care unit was officially approved. We're going to double the number of beds by the end of the year." In recent months, Richard had found a new way to apply his business experience and financial resources. Instead of simply making donations, he had become a non-paid strategic consultant for several public health institutions, helping to optimize processes, negotiate with suppliers, and develop sustainable funding programs. "And how was the meeting with your family?" Mary asked more quietly, touching his arm with concern. "Complicated, but we will talk about that later." The truth was that the last few months had been challenging in ways Richard had not anticipated. Renouncing his family inheritance had only been the first step. Rebuilding his personal and social identity away from the world of the New York elite had proven to be a complex and sometimes painful process. His mother had completely cut ties, a decision that still hurt him deeply, despite understanding the pressure she faced from Mrs. Helen. His father maintained contact. Richard felt sporadic tension and embarrassment. Most of his high society friends had simply disappeared when it became clear he wouldn't back down from his decision. "Uncle Richard!" Sophia came running again, this time accompanied by 2 school friends. "The square dance is about to start. Are you going to dance with me again?" "Of course, but this time I already know the basic steps." "That's great, because this year there are harder steps." As Sophia ran back to prepare for the square dance, Mary slipped her arm through his. "Are you okay? You seem thoughtful." "I'm reflecting on how much has changed in a year," Richard replied honestly. "Last year, I was here as a curious spectator. Now you're here as the man Sophia considers a father figure, who knows half the people at the party by name, and who genuinely enjoys dancing the square dance," Mary finished with a smile. How do you feel about this transformation? Terrified and happy at the same time. Why terrified? Richard hesitated, searching for the right words to express a fear that had been growing in his heart over the past months. Because I've never had a real family before, and now that I do, the possibility of losing, that terrifies me more than any business crisis I've ever faced. Mary stopped walking, forcing him to look at her. Richard, look at me. When he obeyed, she continued with a firm yet gentle voice. You're not going to lose us, not in the way you're thinking. How can you be sure? Because true love isn't built in a year, but revealed in a year, and what has been revealed between us is solid. At that moment, the music for the square dance began, and Sophia energetically waved for Richard to join the formation in the center of the playground. Let's go, Mary laughed, pulling him by the hand. Time to show that you've learned the harder steps. This year's square dance was indeed more elaborate. There were new movements, more complex partner exchanges, and a grand finale where all the couples gathered in the center for a final circle. Richard stumbled a few times, laughed at his own mistakes, and allowed himself to be guided not only by Sophia, but by the entire community he had come to consider his own. When the music ended and everyone applauded, Sophia hugged him tightly. Uncle Richard, can I ask you an important question? Sure, Sophia. Are you going to marry my mom? The direct and innocent question left Richard momentarily speechless, especially since he had been thinking exactly about that over the past weeks. Why do you want to know? Because I really want to have a real dad. And you're the nicest person my mom has ever dated. In fact, you're the only person she's dated since I can remember. Richard looked at Mary, who had come closer and clearly heard the conversation. Her eyes were shining with contained tears. Sophia, Mary said softly, those are adult decisions. I know, Sophia interrupted with the peculiar wisdom of children. But I just wanted you to know that I would love it if Uncle Richard became my real dad. He already helps me with math, takes me to the movies, and does that funny voice when he reads bedtime stories. Richard felt something expand in his chest, an emotion so pure and overwhelming that for a moment he couldn't breathe. It was the feeling of being not just loved, but completely accepted, not for his money, not for social status, not for convenience, but simply for who he had become alongside them. Sophia, he said, kneeling down to her level again, can I ask you a question too? Sure. If I asked your mom to marry me, would you give me your blessing? Sophia's eyes widened and she quickly looked at Mary before answering. Are you asking her to marry you right now? I'm seriously thinking about it. Sophia practically jumped with excitement. Yes, yes, of course you have my blessing. Mom, did you hear? Uncle Richard wants to marry you. Mary was clearly surprised, but her eyes sparkled with a happiness Richard had never seen before. Sophia, sweetheart, why don't you go play a bit more at the fishing game? Uncle Richard and I need to talk. After Sophia ran off, practically flying with excitement, Mary turned to Richard with an expression that mixed amusement and nervousness. So, was that a marriage proposal? It was a request for permission to make a marriage proposal. Richard smiled nervously. I wanted to make sure Sophia would approve before buying a ring and planning something more formal. And are you sure you want to do this? Marrying me means marrying us both. It means being a stepdad to a 9-year-old girl who will need you for at least the next 15 years. Mary, Richard took her hands, over the past 8 months, you two have taught me what family means. Sophia already calls me for help with homework, calls me when she's sad, tells me secrets that even you don't know. And you... He paused, searching for the right words. You made me discover that I am capable of real love. I don't want to imagine my life without you two. And your family? Your mom still doesn't talk to you. My family now is you two. If my mom and my grandmother ever decide that love is more important than prejudice, they will be welcome in our lives. If not, that's their choice." Mary remained silent for a long moment, watching Sophia play at the fishing game with other kids. "Richard," she finally said, "I love you. I love you for who you are, for the man you've become alongside us, for the way you care for Sophia as if she were your daughter. But marriage it's a commitment. I know, and I'm ready for that commitment." "Then yes," she smiled, tears finally streaming down her face. "If you ask me officially, with a ring and everything, I will say yes." Yes. When they kissed there, in the middle of the summer festival, to the sound of the accordion, and surrounded by the aroma of hot apple cider and roasted corn, it felt as if the entire journey of the past 14 months had reached its natural destination. Sophia, who had been discreetly watching from the fishing game booth, dropped everything and ran to them shouting, "They're getting married! They're getting married!" attracting the attention of half the party. Later that night, after Sophia had fallen asleep, exhausted from emotion, Richard and Mary sat on the sofa of their small apartment in Brooklyn, the same sofa where they had shared so many important conversations over the past months. "So," Mary said, snuggling against him, "when are you thinking of making the official proposal?" "How about now?" "Now." Richard stood up, searched his jacket, and pulled out a small navy blue velvet box. "Richard, you already had the ring." "I bought it last week. I was waiting for the right moment." He knelt on the living room floor, opening the box to reveal an elegant yet understated engagement ring, a classic solitaire in white gold, beautiful without being extravagant. "Mary Johnson," he said, his voice trembling slightly with nerves, "will you marry me? Will you build a family with me? Will you teach me to be a dad to Sophia and maybe future little siblings for her?" Mary was openly crying now, but her smile was radiant. "I will," she whispered. "I accept all of this. I accept you. I accept our crazy family. I accept our life that isn't perfect, but is ours." When Richard slid the ring onto her finger, they both knew they had reached the end of one journey and the beginning of another. 6 months later, they married in a simple ceremony in the garden of the Children's Hospital, the place where their story had truly begun. Sophia was the flower girl, wearing a pink dress she had chosen herself, carrying simple rings that symbolized a love built on authenticity, not on fortune. Mrs. Helen Smith and Mrs. Smith did not attend, but they sent a gift, a sign that perhaps with time, wounds could heal. And when Richard carried Sophia on his shoulders during the celebration, while Mary laughed beside them in a simple white cotton dress, he knew he had found something that no amount of money could buy. A family built on true love, mutual respect, and the courage to choose authenticity over social expectations. 3 years later, when Richard woke up every morning, in the 3-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, they had bought together a home filled with plants he had finally learned to care for, family photos on the walls, and the constant sound of laughter. He knew he had made the right choice. Sophia, now 12, simply called him Dad. Mary had been promoted to supervisor of the neonatal intensive care unit, and Richard had found purpose in a simpler life that was infinitely richer in meaning. Sometimes, at night, when Mary fell asleep beside him and he heard Sophia studying in her room, Richard thought of the man he had been 3 years before, rich in money but poor in genuine connections, and he felt nothing but gratitude for the courage he had to choose love over inheritance, authenticity over appearances, true family over social expectations. Because in the end, he had discovered that true wealth was not in the bank account, but in the sound of "Good night, Dad," whispered by a girl who chose to love him, and in the good-night kiss from a woman who loved him not for what he had, but for who he was.